And that's another 24 hours. All right, folks, it's that time again. Time to give up the goodies. All right, who's gonna be first? How about you, crossbow lad? Whoa, what the fuck? Danny's Disc Club. Episode 58, Destiny 3 is still a Skinner box. Episode 19, Assassin's Creed Battlegrounds, who thought this was a good idea? What the hell are these? Episode 1, Climbing.
The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. It's the only Zelda game I've ever completed, though I haven't really completed it, have I? I've still got 180 of these bastards to find. So many did I find myself stopping to check piles of stones in every other game. Zelda is a game that involves a lot of climbing mountains, climbing stables, climbing giants. Not since Mark Echo's Getting Up has climbing been such an integral part of gameplay. I've done a lot of climbing in Zelda in the past few weeks. In fact, if I were to hazard a breakdown of my activities in Breath of the Wild, I bet the majority of it would be cursing the clouds when it starts raining and accidentally drowning. We've been used to jumping from platform to platform for decades, but climbing in games was largely secondary until Lara Croft turned up in 1996. Tomb Raider was a great climbing game, and though the series would eventually descend into a more commonplace third-person shooter affair, Lara Croft's debut was a game focused on using your grubby mitts to gain access to otherwise unreachable areas. Your path through levels wasn't dictated by power bars or upgrades, but by the sheer ability of her body, her height, her ability to reach, to jump, to withstand the force of gravity. God damn, that fucking 20 years later, that still makes me flinch. The physicality of the act was front and center. You learned where best to grab by patterns in the geometry that became familiar over time. Flat surfaces to grab, tight areas to shimmy on, and 45-degree surfaces used to slide on. This was reminiscent of Jordan Mechner's seminal Prince of Persia, a game where jumping patterns were determined by the implied grid system on which every level was built upon. So when the 3D Prince of Persias came out, we saw those as the logical next step in that concept. But in hindsight, the push-forward free running of those games was more akin to something like Mirror's Edge, games concentrated on forward momentum rather than upward. For me, it wasn't until 2007's Assassin's Creed that we saw the true evolution of Tomb Raider's mantling. In AC, climbing was your unfair advantage, a modest physical ability that allowed you to access parts of the world most normal humans couldn't. No superpower or special weapon, the type of advantage even the meekest of citizen could employ. Not only did it align elegantly with the themes of the game, but it was executed incredibly well. Climbing didn't feel like a chore in Assassin's Creed, but it wasn't so automatic that it felt like the game was doing it for you. And once you reached the top, you were rewarded with a quick and exciting leap back down to the common folk. The other thing this did was provide Assassin's Creed with plenty of aspirational views. Aspirational views are a critically important element of level design. Think about the mountain in Journey, the courtyards in Doom, or the volcano in the driving sequence of the most recent Uncharted. Aspirational views provide the player a visual target to aim for, plus it's an important part of allowing players to figure out the critical path. Even if they don't follow it, if the player knows the critical path through the level, that means they also know the areas that are not it. This has become especially important as level design becomes increasingly open. It was difficult to get your bearings on the tight streets of Damascus. That was until you climbed up a few stories to get your bearings, a mechanic demonstrated rather more deliberately at the various sync points dotted around the map. Climbing wasn't just something you had to do, it was a mechanic that solved the player's problem. Where am I? Climb, climb, climb. Oh, I'm here. Climbing didn't need to be forced upon the player. You just did it because it helped you. Ultimately though, the climbing in Assassin's Creed itself became an obstacle. As the games continued on an iterative cycle, the climbing was buried under a smorgasbord of other mechanics. It's easier to add things to a game than solve the problems of keeping the old ideas interesting. So the solution from the studio was to simply make climbing easier. Hold down this button to climb. Suddenly, it was a superpower, and with so many other ways to get to your objective, it was far less interesting. Many other games have since used towers to create aspirational views or simply to unlock new missions. Many of them did clever things with the climbing of those towers, but all in all it felt pretty deliberate and inorganic. So for years I've always wondered what the holy grail of climbing was. What was next? What was Assassin's Creed leading to? Was it about the act of climbing or the view from the top? Was it about providing the player with more control or less? Ubisoft's Grow Home was a terrific success in balancing between too much control and too little, while games like Crackdown are a great example of how taking the reins off the player entirely can lead to really fun world exploration.
Climbing, it's a tough cookie to crack, which is probably why so many games just sort of ignore it. But that also doesn't exactly stop us from trying now, does it?
The lessons Tomb Raider taught us over 20 years ago are as true now as they were then. Finding your way around virtual worlds is often an exercise in trigonometry, and in games without actual climbing mechanics, hammering the jump button will usually still get you somewhere. The rules are simple: flat surfaces are game, sheer ones aren't. But there's an area between the two where things get a little hazy. Somewhere inside of that 90 degrees, there's a walkable surface. A bite point that we sort of intuitively search for while riding up the side of a hill in Fallout, Skyrim, or Horizon Zero Dawn. And the thing is, we're more than happy to do this. I've never jump climbed up the side of a cliff in a game and thought, man, I really wish they added a button for all this. If anything, finding your way up a seemingly impossible mountainside is incredibly rewarding. The simple act of chaining together places to jump is fun, and again, it's the player solving a problem for themselves.
But while in these games climbing has emerged from the rather rough intersection of player movement and level geometry, in Breath of the Wild everything has been built around climbing and flying down.
Exploration is key to Breath of the Wild. It's set in a large open world where you can feasibly travel anywhere you want. Progress is limited by a handful of particular items, but for the most part, you're free to explore the world as you wish, as long as you can stand the heat, or lack thereof. The biggest obstacle in your journey around this world is the topography itself. Mountains, valleys, and sheer cliffs block progression. Link has a pool of stamina, but it's depleted as you climb, run, and swim. This means you can't just climb a cliff as long as you want, something we've basically taken for granted in 20 years of games. This forces the player to think tactically about climbing, and with a rock face, it doesn't seem like there's a critical path laid out for you by a designer. So like those slippery slopes in Skyrim, you have to use your eye and gut to find your way up those cliffs. I absolutely adored this about Zelda. Every time I scaled a mountain and was rewarded with the view from the top, it gave me a burst of accomplishment that no fancy graphic or musical chime could match. And like Assassin's Creed, you were rewarded with an exhilarating ride back down to the ground. And here's the thing, these mini achievements work perfectly in this game. Breath of the Wild isn't your normal open world affair.
Aside from the Divine Beast and a couple of other notable exceptions like that one where you build a town, there aren't really any multi-part quests in Breath of the Wild. Most of the stuff that you do only takes a couple of minutes.
This is a game played short burst after short burst. Uncover a shrine, complete a shrine, fight some baddies, tame a horse, collect food, uncover some loot. Oh look, a Korok seed. Oh look, a camp. Breath of the Wild is a game centered about 2-minute engagements, a constant procession of mini quests. There's always something to do, and when there isn't, what do? You climb until you see something. And there's always something to climb. There's always an aspirational view showing you the landscape, distant shrines, and areas yet to explore. In fact, the aspirational views in this game go one step further by literally telling you how much of the game you've completed, rewarding you for your good work with lasers from the Divine Beasts.
But climbing isn't just used to show you what to do in Breath of the Wild, it's the load-bearing mechanic of the entire game. Everything involves climbing. From the very first time you grab an apple to the final ascent of Hyrule Castle, you're clutching at rock faces and looking upwards. The game is built vertically, not just mountains, but camps, combat arenas, shrines, villages, and of course the towers themselves. Nothing is flat in this game, even open areas of the world are built from rolling hills and plateaus. While other games use high walls and cliffs to tell the player where they should and should not be, in Breath of the Wild they're so common that you're encouraged to clamber over them. The experience has been built with that in mind. The world is constantly pulling your eyes upward.
It's your unfair advantage in combat, allowing you to escape, lob bombs, and drop down from the sky. Just remember how naked and exposed you felt in the relative flatness of the desert. Whether we realize it or not, Breath of the Wild is constantly encouraging us to climb. Zelda's climbing mechanic isn't for everyone, like driving to missions in GTA 5 or the horses in Wild Hunt. There will always be some number of people who find manual exploration more hindering than empowering.
But as somebody who loves exploring for the sake of exploring in video games, I've absolutely adored my time wandering the peaks and valleys of Hyrule, especially as most of the Tomb Raiders and Assassins of this world are all too preoccupied murdering thousands of people. Oh look, a Korok seed. Thank you so much for watching this episode of Danny's Disc Club. It took me years to name this. Please don't give out to me for not calling it Counterpoint or Spawn Point or Waypoint. A lot of names got thrown out when that site got made. Thank you so much to all of the wonderful, handsome, beautiful people who support me on Patreon, who support all the NoClip stuff, and also support this show. Without the names on screen right now, it would not be possible. Also, thousands of other names. In fact, if you want to watch this show early, why don't you support me on Patreon? Maybe you will be able to then. In fact, you will be able to then. You can learn more about it at patreon.com/Danny O'Dwyer. Sorry to put a pitch at the end of this video, but you may notice there was no commercial on this video, unless of course Nintendo monetized the video. That may have happened. Alright, I'm gonna go shoot a Witcher documentary next week, but we'll be back next month with more Danny's Disc Club.